And we have a copy of that, which is a very badly scratched copy, and it's being cleaned up at the moment. So hopefully that will be available eventually, or soon. I remember the talk as being one of the most striking ones at Parklands, because it was one where there were people literally doubled up laughing. If I can get a polite little giggle tonight, I would be very pleased. But there were people who were actually doubled up. I can't do anything like the voices that David did, and it was David's voice that was most marvellous. I don't know if you've ever seen any of the Disney Winnie the Pooh characters, but they just don't seem to get it right at all with any of them, and he seemed to get them spot on. I remember that Ivor had a slightly Birmingham accent, which seemed perfect for real. I'm not going to try and replicate that, because of course David came from the Black Country and he could get that sort of resonance of, I don't know, board insolence, which I think the voice requires. So essentially it would be that. And what he did, I remember, because when he did it at, I saw both of them, when he did it at Gordon Smith's, I noticed that he didn't make any notes at all. He literally read from the book. I was fascinated because he had the book separated out with paper clips, and that's what he did. So I'm going to do a similar sort of process. But as is the nature of me, I hope I'll probably stop at different places and discuss points, and you'll please by all means do that or ask questions. I've already had a very telling question, which I hope to come to later on. But I'll start by voicing it now. The tone of the whole thing, the whole book, Tao of Pooh, and I see one or two people have brought the book along, which is great, so by all means please follow it with me, is something which seems to contradict Eugene's work, a message, which is a message of unlearning. Eugene advocated that we study words, that we did dictionary work, we studied the meaning of words particularly, and here you have an irreverence for them, and an irreverence for any sort of book learning, which will come out as we explore the book. But that question is quite a profound one, and I think that it's one of the, particularly for a group like us, it's one of those very important questions that we have to ask ourselves. Particularly when Eugene endorsed the book wholeheartedly, so that, I mean, I think it's the only thing where David actually read from the book directly. And I don't think he added very much to it at all in the first half of the thing. In the second half of it, again, the discussion was hilarious, but and Eugene pitched in on that very well. So there was a wholehearted endorsement of this particular book. It's a very simple and easy book to read. It's interesting at this point to discuss it because last year the writer Benjamin Hoff went off in a huff. He remained quite a private person while when the book was first published, and I remember imagining him as quite an academic. He talks as if he'd studied Asian studies, and in particular Taoism, in an American university, which he did. He produced this book. I had a tremendous amount of problems with the republishers. Any of you who had any dealings with publishers will know that they're very strange beasts. And one, he was using quotations from other publishers' material, the Winnie the Pooh books, so that would have caused some horrendous problems because there's all sorts of ownership rights with these things, and ownership rights are horrendous things to pick your way through. But he reckons he was swindled all the way along, and not only that, but bamboozled into writing other books as well, or framing up other books. They wouldn't let him write what he wanted to write, in other words. This first book is probably his untouched stuff, but the other ones were all distorted by the publishers themselves, so much so that he's sworn he'll never write again, ever, anything. And he's thrown his rattle right out of the pram, and he's gone off into the woods written about them, and it does. When you read it, it is horrendous the way they sort of dealt with it. And you have to remember that publishers are commercial enterprises, and what they're really out to doing is making money. And the terrible things, as with movies and TV and stuff, is that people who control access to these instruments are literally there to make a living out of it, and they're desperate to make a success of every book that they get out, and so they think they know what is a success. And of course, no one knows what makes a success. It's one of those things which is in the lap of the gods. And having made a success in this, that he thought he would be clear, but of course he isn't. He's just as directed and as channeled and as railroaded towards what they think is going to be the best sequel, you know, and then the best sequel to the sequel, etc. So that's an unhappy thing. Without a doubt, this book is a very poetic description of what is quite a complex thing to piece together. Right. One of the things which David mentions at the very beginning of the book, which is worth stating, I think we're probably more familiar with Taoism now than we were then. It was quite a fresh idea, even at Parklands, I think, when it was first discussed. Is just a little point which he makes just before he starts reading, is that the Tao, and it said Tao, it's written T-A-O, but it said Tao, and this is the new scholarship which is approaching many of the Eastern words and realigning them, like Beijing for Peking, and this is anomalies which the English people have mangled of the way that people spoke their own language. So we have to take their understanding rather than presenting our own. Tao he describes as meaning simply the way. And the essence of the book is that the Tao is the great way, which is created out of all the entwinings of our little ways. And each of us has a way which is right for us. And no one else can possibly know that except us, and most of us never find it because we're too busy looking for it. And the whole process is literally as simple as that. That Taoism is about finding that way which is already inside of you, and which is almost impossible to step off, but still we manage to do it. So that's the sort of knotty problem that the whole book is directed towards. And it is sheer genius. I know a lot of people who've read this book, and they're all really impressed with the way that the Taoism slots perfectly into Winnie the Pooh without wrenching or ripping or pulling or anything like that. The two just blend together. I hope you're going to get that feeling today from my reading of it, and from your. If you do have the book, by all means, read along. Now, there's something I wanted to do just before we started. So there's something I came across literally a few weeks ago. It was a description of a very small meditation, and I think it's totally in keeping with what we do here. So actually, before we start, it's now called cardiac coherence breathing. It's quite a mouthful, but what it means is 1 minute, 6 breaths, very slow, no thinking, just perceive yourself breathing. In other words, notice yourself breathing. Each breath is going to be different. So I'm going to actually roughly time you. It's not going to be a military operation, but if you get yourself comfortable, close or lower your eyes just so that you're not looking at anybody else or anything that's going to stimulate thought if you can. Slow your breath down, because 6 breaths to a minute is quite slow. And if you will, just notice and focus on 6 steady breaths. expressions in the book is to approach the stillness, the nothing of yourself. Not because you're denigrating it in any sense, but that the nothing itself is really quite profound, and that the depth of that nothing is terribly important, and it's you, and it's direct, and it doesn't need any intermediary. It's you, and you know that, and no one can take that away from you, or should be able to take that away from you, but they do all the time. Right, so just before we start, I need to give out some song sheets for you, because there are 2 poems in the book, which, in the early part of the book, which I'd like us to join in, and I've got 20 of these, so, sorry, excuse me. Okay, well, if you got 2 there, you can pass those out, and then pass them forwards, and if you can pass those out, pass those out as well. If you've got your books, of course, you don't need them, and I'll tell you virtually what pages some more coming in. Notice we've gone into colour. No expenses spared. It is terribly extravagant. It reminds me of a very great judge. I sat listening to a very great judge one day, talking to, I used to teach at a public school, and he came to talk to the boys. And he said a very profound thing. He said, I realised very early that a jumper was something that you wore when your mother was cold. Right. I'm in the foreword, if anyone wants to join me. Second page of the foreword. Some of us were discussing the great masters of wisdom, and someone was saying how all of them came from the East, and I was saying that some of them didn't. But he was going on and on, just like the sentence, not paying any attention, and when I decided to read a quotation of wisdom from the West to prove that there was more to the world than one half, I read, "When you wake up in the morning, Pooh," said the little rat, "what's the first thing that you say to yourself?" "What's for breakfast?" said Pooh. "What do you say, Piglet?" "I say, I wonder what's going to happen exciting today," said Piglet. Pooh nodded thoughtfully. "It's the same thing." "What's that?" the unbeliever asked. "Wisdom from a Western Taoist," I said. "Sounds like something from Winnie the Pooh." "It is." "That's not about Taoism," he said. "Oh yes it is," I said. "No it's not." "What do you think it's about?" "It's about that dumpy little bird that wanders round asking silly questions, making up songs, and going through all kinds of adventures without ever accumulating any amount of intellectual knowledge, or losing his simple-minded sort of happiness. That's what it's all about," he said. "Same thing," I said. That was when I began to get an idea to write a book that explained the principle of Taoism through Winnie the Pooh, and explained Winnie the Pooh through the principles of Taoism. When informed of my intentions, the scholars exclaimed, "Preposterous," and things like that. Others said it was the stupidest thing they'd ever heard, and that I must be dreaming. Some said it was a nice idea, but too difficult. Just where would you begin? They asked. Well, an old Taoist statement puts it this way. 1,000-mile journey starts with one step, so we will begin at the beginning. Let's imagine that we've walked down a narrow street in a large Chinese city and have found a small shop that sells scrolls painted in the classic manner. We go inside and ask to be shown something allegorical, something humorous perhaps, but with some sort of timeless meaning. The shopkeeper smiles. I have just the thing, he says, a copy of the Vinegar Tasters. He leads us into a large table and unrolls a scroll, placing it down for us to examine. Excuse me, I must attend to something for a moment, he says, and goes into the back of the shop and leaves us alone with the painting. Although we can see that it's a fairly recent version, we know that the original was painted long ago. Just when is uncertain. But by now the theme of the painting is well known. We see three men standing around a vat of vinegar. Each has dipped his finger into the vinegar and has tasted it. The expression on each man's face shows his individual reaction. Since the painting is allegorical, we're meant to understand that these are no ordinary vinegar tasters, but are instead representations of the three great teachings of China. And the vinegar they are sampling represents the essence of life. The three masters are Confucius, Buddha, and Lao Tzu, author of the oldest existing book on Taoism. Now the first, Confucius, has a sour look on his face. The second wears a bitter expression. But the third man is smiling. To Confucius, life seems rather sour. He believed that the present was out of step with the past and that the government of man on earth was out of harmony with the way of heaven. The way of heaven was the government of the universe. Therefore, he emphasized reverence for the ancestors as well as for the ancient rituals and ceremonies, which the emperor, as the son of heaven, acted as the intermediary between the limitless heaven and the limited earth. Under Confucianism, the use of precisely measured chord music, prescribed steps and actions and phrases all added up to an extremely complex system of rituals used for a particular purpose. So the rituals there were laid down. Everything was formulated, in other words. Everything was literally fixed and nailed down. And everything had to be exactly as it was. And the story, of the saying which is said of Confucius at the time was that if the mat was not straight, then the master would not sit. Everything had to be just so. This ought to give an indication of the extent to which things were carried out under Confucianism. And Confucianism was contemporary with Lao Tzu and with Taoism. To Buddha, the second figure in the painting, life on earth was bitter, filled with attachments and desires that led to suffering. The world was seen as a setter of traps, a generator of illusions, a revolving wheel of pain for all creatures. In order to find peace, the Buddha considered it necessary to transcend the world of dust and to reach for Nibbana. Literally, Nibbana was a state of no wind, no movement. Although the essentially optimistic attitude of the Chinese altered Buddhism considerably after it was brought in from its native India, the devout Buddhist often saw the way to Nirvana interrupted all the same by the bitter wind of everyday existence. To Lao Tzu, the harmony that naturally existed between heaven and earth from the very beginning could be found by anyone at any time, but not by following the rules of Confucianists. I'm just going to say that again, because it's very important to the whole rest of the message that Hoff's getting across. The harmony that naturally existed between heaven and earth from the very beginning of time could be found by anyone at any time, but not by following the rules of the Confucianists or anybody else's rules other than yours. As he stated in his Tao of Winnie, the Tao of Virtue book, run by the same laws, but not run by the laws of man. These laws affected not only the spinning of the distant planets, but the activities of the birds in the forest and the fish in the sea. According to Lao Tzu, the more that men interfered with the natural balance produced and governed by the universal laws, the furthest away from their harmony they got, and the harmony retreated further into the distance. The more the forcing, the more the trouble. Whether heavy or light, wet or dry, fast or slow, everything had its own nature already within it, which could not be violated without causing difficulty. When abstract and arbitrary rules were imposed from outside, struggle was inevitable. Only then did life become sour. So sourness then is an interference, a mental interference, a thought-provoking interference, a theorizing, if you like, which interferes and gets between us and the world. To Lao Tzu, the world was not a setter of traps, but a teacher of valuable lessons. Its lessons needed to be learned, just as its laws needed to be followed, and then all would go well. Rather than turn away from the world of dust, Lao Tzu advised others to join the dust of the world. What he saw operating behind everything in heaven and earth, he called the Tao, the way. A basic principle of Lao Tzu's teaching was that the way of the universe could not be adequately described in words, and that it would be insulting both to its unlimited power, and to the intelligent human mind to attempt to do so. Still, its nature could be understood, and those who cared the most about it, and the life from which it was inseparable, understood it best. Okay? So the essential thing, which you've heard many times, is that it cannot be described. And to attempt to describe it is just to distort it. In the painting, why is Lao Tzu smiling? After all, the vinegar that represents life must certainly have an unpleasant taste, as the expressions on the faces of the other two men indicate. But through working in harmony with life's circumstances, Taoist understanding changes what others may perceive as negative into something positive. From the Taoist point of view, sourness and bitterness come from the interfering and the unappreciative mind. Life itself, when understood and utilized for what it is sweet. That is the message of the vinegar tasters. The Tao of Who. I want to page 9 for those following things. I jump about, sorry, and I'll try and remind you when I actually do. We're on to page, not page 9, sorry, but on to page 10. About a quarter of the way down. So here we are, about to try and explain Pooh. It's actually said Pooh, the uncarved block. So there is actually a Chinese character called Pooh. By a character, I mean a letter form, which is a pictogram for the uncarved block. In the classic Taoist manner, we won't try too hard to explain too much, because that would only confuse things. And because it would leave the impression that it was all only an intellectual idea that could be left on the intellectual level and ignored. And then you could say, well, that idea is very nice, but what does it amount to? So instead we shall try and show what it amounts to in various ways. Pooh, by the way, is pronounced sort of like poo, but not so much. But without so much ooh. Like the sound you make when you're blowing a fly off your arm on a hot summer's day. So I translate this, it's like that. Okay? Before we bring our resident expert in for a few illuminating remarks, let's explain something. The essence of the principle of the uncarved block is that things in their original simplicity contain their own natural power, power which is easily spoilt and lost when that simplicity is changed. For the written character Pooh, typical Chinese dictionary will give a definition of natural, simple, plain, and honest. Pooh is composed of two separate characters combined. radical, or the root meaning, is that for a tree or for wood. The second, the phonetic or sound-giving one, is the character for dense growth or thicket. So from tree in a thicket, or wood not cut, comes the meaning of things in their natural state. What is generally represented in English versions of Taoist writing as the uncarved block. This basic Taoist principle applies not only to things in their natural beauty and function, but to people as well, or to birds, which brings us back to Pooh, the very epitome of the uncarved block of a thing in its natural state. As an illustration of the principle, he may appear to be too simple at times. Just before we move on from here, when we were at the Shakespeare a week ago, I think it was, we were talking about the fact that when I was a boy, I used to help one of my uncles on an allotment, and he was quite a left-wing character and complete atheist, and he used to tell this joke about the fact that one day a vicar came along and saw a chap working on his garden and digging his garden and making it pretty good. And the vicar says, quite tellingly, to this chap, "Isn't it wonderful what God and man can do together?" And the gardener says, "Well, yes it is, but you should have seen it when he had it by himself." Now, as a boy, that really used to bother me because I couldn't understand. I get it was funny and it was true as well. And I watched my uncle and myself. We used to hack all the thicket down and actually grow spuds and things in it, and it was quite a heavy work. And although I wasn't an atheist at the time, I struggled with the meaning of that. And the essence of it, I think, which is concealed in that statement of the uncarved block, is that when we see nature actually in its rawness, I don't even remember, a couple of years on TV, there was a program by Michael Heseltine, of all people, where he tried to find the ancient wood of Britain. Did anybody see? He went just about everywhere. And he finished up in Scotland, where he found the most untampered forest. And I was, as everybody else was, and including Michael Heseltine, we were all disappointed because it didn't look grand at all. There were no vast oaks or ashes or beech trees in it. There were a few spindly ones that had managed to do quite, but this was a wood that had continued in that state, untouched by human beings, for well over 2,000 years. And what he said was is that we don't realise that this is an incredibly efficient system. It does produce, there's a hierarchy and an evolution of forests. Even if you take them through from being burnt down completely, they will gradually re-establish themselves. It takes hundreds and hundreds of years, but eventually they get to the oaks and the ashes, and then they fall, but there is a natural wastage which is going on, and that the forest should have great balks of rotting timber in it, and it should have lots of little spindly thickets growing up around it, and it should be largely unpassable to human beings. That's the natural state for a forest to be in. And we don't recognise that, because we tend to think of, we have seen so much tended woodland, and so much tended and mown lawns, etc., where the mind has actually organised and set things aside. But we must remember that to produce that, you have to have a compost heap and all sorts of very intense forms of things which are unbeautiful around the back, which we don't look at. But this thing has got all that blended together, including all the parasites and all the things which generate and degenerate the structures so that this thing can continue to be very fertile and to reproduce itself without our interference. Thank you very much. Now that, I think, is actually the close concept of this philosophy of the uncarved block. We have to be able to recognise the fact that to the ordinary civilized human being, what is naturally right often looks completely wrong, or looks wrongish, or not enough, or incomplete. But we have to watch it and look at it and listen to it and watch how things unfold, which is what the book is all about, and what Winnie the Pooh is all about. Because often you're wrong-footed when you first hear Pooh, and then you realise that as things unfold, saying is quite effective. It may not be right, but it's effective. And the world seems to go his way, rather than Rabbit's or Eeyore's or ours. And Rabbit and Eeyore and Owl seem to be the intellectuals. They're the ones who are thinking and producing ideas and constantly formulating. And Pooh just gets on with being right all the time. Wonderful statement. If the right man does the wrong thing in the right way, the right thing works in the right way. If the wrong man does the right thing in the right way, it works in the wrong way. So the process is really, it's inherent on the essence of you in yourself when you do things. And that's the thing we're coming to. And they're the things which are re-described in this book in very telling Poohish ways. So, as an illustrating of the principle, Pooh may appear to be too simple at times. I'm on page 11 here. I think it's more to the right, said Piglet nervously. What do you think, Pooh? Pooh looked at his two paws. And he knew that one of them was the right, and he knew that when you had decided which one of them was the right, then the other one was the left. But he never could remember how to begin. Well, he said slowly, but no matter how he may seem to others, especially to those fooled by appearances, Pooh, the uncarved block, is able to accomplish what he does because he is simple-minded. As any old Taoist walking out of the woods can tell you, simple-minded does not necessarily mean stupid. It's rather significant that the Taoist ideal is that of the still, calm, reflecting mirror mind of the uncarved block. And it's rather significant that Pooh, rather than the thinkers, Owl, Eeyore and Rabbit, is the hero of the House of Pooh, and, Winnie the Pooh and the House of Pooh Corner. Now the opposite of being in the way, in the Tao, is to be lost. Maybe to be lost in the mist. The fact is, said Rabbit, we've missed our way somehow. They were having a rest in a small sandpit on the top of the forest. Pooh was getting rather tired of that sandpit, and he suspected it of following them about. Because whichever direction they started in, they always ended up at it. And each time, as it came through the mist at them, Rabbit said triumphantly, "Now, I know where we are." And Pooh said sadly, "So do I." And Piglet said nothing. He tried to think of something to say, but the only thing he could think of was, "Help! Help!" And it seemed silly to say that when he and Pooh and Rabbit were with him. "Well," said Rabbit, after a long silence in which nobody had thanked him for the nice walk they were having, "we'd better get on, I suppose. Which way shall we try?" "How would it be," said Pooh slowly, "if, as soon as we were out of sight of this pit, we tried to find it again?" "What's the good of that?" said Rabbit. "Well," said Pooh, "we keep looking for home and not finding it. So I thought that if we looked for this pit, we'd be sure not to find it, which would be a good thing, because then we might find something that we weren't looking for, which we might really be looking for." "I don't see much sense in that," said the Rabbit. "If I walked away from this pit and then walked back to it, of course I should find it." "Well, I thought you wouldn't," said Pooh. I just thought." "Try," said Piglet. "We'll wait there for it." Rabbit gave a laugh to show how silly Piglet was, and he walked off into the mist. And after he'd gone 100 yards, he turned round and he walked right back again. And after Pooh and Piglet had waited 20 minutes for him, Pooh got up. "I just thought," said Pooh. "Now then, Piglet, let's go home." "But Pooh," said Piglet, "do you know the way?" "No," said Pooh, "but there are 12 pots of honey in my cupboard, and they've been calling to me for hours. I couldn't hear them properly before because Rabbit would talk, but if nobody says anything, except those 12 pots, I think, Piglet, I shall know where they were coming from." squeaky noise and an ooh noise, because now he began to know where he was, but he still didn't dare to say out loud in case he wasn't. And just when he was getting so sure of himself that it didn't matter whether the pots were calling or not, there was a shout in front of them, and out of the mist came Christopher Robin. So after all, if it was cleverness that counted most, rabbit would be number one instead of the verb. But that's not the way things work. We've come to wish you a very happy Thursday, said Pooh. Why? What's going to happen on Thursday? Asked Rabbit. And when Pooh had explained, and Rabbit, when Pooh had explained, and Rabbit, whose life was made up of very important things, said, I thought you'd really come about something. They sat down for a little. And by, Pooh and Piglet went on again. The wind was right behind them now, so they didn't have to shout. Rabbit's clever, said Pooh thoughtfully. Yes, said Piglet. Rabbit's clever. And he has a brain. Yes, Rabbit has brain. I suppose, said Pooh, that's why he never understands anything. And if clever Rabbit doesn't quite have what it takes, abrasive Eel certainly doesn't either. Why not? Because of what we would call the Eeyore attitude. You might say that while Rabbit's little routine is that of knowledge for the sake of being clever, and while Owl's is that of knowledge for the sake of appearing wise, he's always pontificating about things, Eeyore's knowledge is knowledge for the sake of complaining about something. He's always whining and moaning about something. As anyone who doesn't have it can see, the Eeyore attitude gets in the way of things like wisdom and happiness and pretty much prevents any sort of real accomplishments in life. Eeyore, the grey donkey, stood by the side of the stream and he looked at himself in the water. Pathetic, he said. That's what it is. Pathetic. He turned and walked slowly down the stream for 20 yards, splashed across it and walked slowly back to the other side. Then he looked at himself in the water again. As I thought. No better from this side. But nobody minds. Nobody cares. Pathetic. That's what it is. There was a crackling noise in the bracken behind him, and out came Pooh. Good morning, Eeyore. Good morning, Pooh Bear, said Eeyore gloomily. If it is a good morning, which I doubt. Why? What's the matter? Nothing. Nothing. We can't all, and some of us don't. And that's all there is to it. And that's your attitude completely. Necessarily without a certain severe sense of humour. Right. I'm going to skip up now to page 20. Okay, for those of you flashing about. When you discard arrogance and complexity and a few other things that get in the way, sooner or later you will discover that simple, childlike and mysterious things, simple, childlike and mysterious secret known to those of the uncarved blood, that life is fun. Now one autumn morning, when the wind had blown all the leaves off the trees in the night and was trying to blow the branches off, Pooh and Piglet were sitting in the thoughtful spot and wondering. What I think, said Pooh, is I think we'll go to Pooh Corner and see Eeyore, because perhaps his house has blown away and perhaps he'd like us to build it again. What I think, said Piglet, is I think we'll go and see Christopher Robin, only he won't be there, so we can't. Let's go and see everybody, said Pooh, because when you've been walking in the wind for miles and you suddenly go into somebody's house and he says, hello, Pooh, you're just in time for a little smackle or something, and you are, then it's what I call a friendly day. Piglet looking for small or organising an expedition, if Pooh could think of something, Pooh could. We'll go because it's Thursday, he said. And we'll go to wish everybody a very happy Thursday. Come on, Piglet. From the state of the uncarved block comes the ability to enjoy the simple and the quiet, the natural and the plain. Along with that comes the ability to do things spontaneously and have them work. Well, that's quite something, to be able to do things spontaneously and have them work. Odd as that may appear to others at times, as Piglet put it in Winnie the Pooh, Pooh hasn't much brain, but he never comes to any harm. He does silly things and they turn out right. To understand all this a little better, it might help to look at someone who's quite the opposite. Someone who's owl, for example. If we come to Owl's house, as some of us have so many times before, searching for answers to questions of one sort or another, will we find the answers there? Before we go in and take a look around, it seems appropriate to have a few background remarks about the kind of scholar that Owl represents in relation to the attitudes and principles of Taoism. To begin with, it is necessary to point out that in China, scholars were generally Confucianist in training and orientation, and therefore they spoke of somewhat different language to the Taoists, who tended to see the Confucianist scholars as busy ants, spoiling the picnic of life, rushing backwards and forth to pick up the bits and the pieces dropped from above. In the final section of the Tao Te Ching, Lao Tzu wrote, "The wise are not learned, the learned are not wise," an attitude shared by countless Taoists before and since. From the Taoist point of view, while the scholarly intellect may be useful for analysing certain things, deeper and broader matters are beyond its limited reach. It seems rather odd somehow that Taoism, the way of the whole man, the true man, the spirit man, to use a few of the Taoist terms, is for the most part interpreted here in the West by the scholarly owl. By scholars, in fact. That's the way we tend to think of the spirit man. By the brain, the academician, the dry as dust, absent-minded professor. Far from reflecting the Taoist ideal of wholeness and independence, this incomplete and unbalanced creature divides all kinds of abstract things into little categories and compartments, while remaining rather helpless and disorganized in his everyday life. That's something which is quite true, actually. Anyone who's mingled with lecturers in university level, it's amazing how many absent-minded ones there are. They forget just about everything. They lose papers, you give them papers for marking, you wait months and they tell you that they haven't got it, and they tell you off for not handing it in, you know, and it was in their bicycle saddle. I know for a fact, that's a direct experience of mine. It's in the saddle on his bike, you know. You remember giving it to him? Oh yes, you gave it to me in the pub, didn't you? That's right. I know where it'll be. So, that's it. This, while remaining rather helpless and disorganized in their daily life, rather than learn it from Taoist teachers and from direct experience, he learns intellectually and indirectly from books. Bea and I actually endorsed this. We weren't actually having dinner with a friend of ours who was a lecturer at university, and I think my wife refused to eat anything because there was a slug coming down his curtains. He didn't mind. Yes, that chap is now at Oxford, so where he's lecturing. So don't know about his personal hygiene, but I'll leave you with that one. His cat used to be out of cans on the stove as well, which is amazing, really. Right. So, these chaps don't learn from direct experience, they learn from books. And since they don't usually, he doesn't usually put Taoist principles into practice in an everyday sort of way, his explanations of them important details such as how they work and where you can apply them. On top of that, it's very hard to find any of the spirit of Taoism in the lifeless writings of the humorless academic morticians. Those bleached out scholarly dissertations contain no more of the character of Taoist wisdom than does the typical wax museum. Right. What's that, said Pooh? What's what, I asked. What you just said. The Confucianist. Well, let's see. The Confucianist, or desiccated scholar, is one who studies knowledge for the sake of knowledge, and who keeps what he learns to himself, or to his own small group, writing pompous and pretentious papers that no one else can understand, rather than working out the enlightenment of others. How's that? That's much better, said Pooh. Owl is about to illustrate the Confucianist desiccated scholar. Oh, which brings us back to Owl. Now let's see. Did Rabbit describe the situation? How did Rabbit describe the situation with Owl? Here it is. You can't help respecting somebody who can spell Tuesday, even if he doesn't spell it right. But spelling isn't everything. There are days when spelling Tuesday simply doesn't count. By the way, Pooh, how do you spell Tuesday? Spell what? Said Pooh. Tuesday. You know, Monday, Tuesday. My dear Pooh, said Owl, everybody knows that it's spelled with a 2. Is it? Said Pooh. Of course. After all, it's the second day of the week. Oh, oh, is that how it works? Says Pooh. All right, Owl, I said. Then what comes after Tuesday? Thursday, said Owl. You're just confusing things. This is the day after Tuesday, and it's not Thursday. I mean, it's not Thursday. Then what is it? Said Owl. It's today, said Pooh. My favourite day, said Pooh. We wonder why the scholars don't think much of it today. Perhaps it's because they confuse themselves thinking about the other days so much. Now, one rather annoying thing about scholars is that they are always using big words that some of us can't understand. Well, said Owl, the customary procedure in such cases is as follows. What does customary procedure mean? For I'm a bird with very little brain and long words bother me. It means the thing to do. As long as it means that, I don't mind, said Pooh, humbly. It means the thing to do. That's customary procedure. Now, this brings us to one of the points that was made to me before the talk. The question which I hinted at was that how are we meant to consider this denigration of the academic attitude when Eugene said that we must analyse words whenever we came across one that we didn't understand. Now that process has just been explained for us because Owl is using the word customary procedure. And to understand that, you have to be familiar with its usage. But if you analyse it down, it means doing things in the order, the way they should be done. That's all it means. And I remember talking to Eugene about one of those things. I think it was at a small gathering, and we were talking about the word administration. And he said all it means is taking things in and giving things out. So an administrator, which is a Latin word, is a very important sounding tone for somebody who takes things in and gives things out. And in big companies, someone will take things in, and another person will give things out, and they're both administrators. And that's all it is. And what he said was that it's like eating. When you give somebody a big word, most of them swallow it whole, and they're filled with a thing called awe. And awe is the sensation, this is the way he described it, awe is the sensation of a full stomach. It's like swallowing your dinner whole, which some people do. And then they sit there. That's the awe of someone who's swallowed a big word. Now, to take it the way it should be is you have to break it down into small bits. And all those words are breakable down into small chunks. Usually syllables. That means two consonants with a vowel in the middle, usually. Not necessarily, but usually. And you can find them that way. And if you break them down into syllables, you can usually analyze the syllables into simple engineering type words, because these languages were invented by very simple, direct people, and they were making references to things. So procedure, actually those three things can be analysed very simply. Now what I think he was getting at with the use of the dictionary, and certainly what it meant for me, was that when you've got a good comprehensive understanding of the tiny syllables and what they mean, then your understanding of words means that you can break big words down and know what people are getting at as soon as you hear a new one. So you subsume more words under smaller and smaller titles, that in fact you learn less and less. You've got a smaller vocabulary, but you can cover far more words when you hear them. Now that's because you're tuning it down into little bits. And to tune it down, you really need a book which is going to break it down into small bits and tell you where the small bits come from. After a while, you become very customary with them, and you understand where those bits fit together. So you've got a pretty good guess of what a word means just by hearing it, even if it's the first time you've come across it. So that, I think, jumps across those two things of you've got somebody here who is representing a simplistic approach to life. You've also got the fact that in many cases we make our language opaque because we don't want other people to understand, or we want to bamboozle them. Certainly I've been bamboozled by words, and people do this deliberately. We have jargons between us, so we can talk quickly, we say, about things and refer to them, but actually it also excludes people. There's a very interesting chap called Steven Pinker who actually says that we use words to make a tribal sense within society. We have words are being coined all the time, and improvements on words and inflections are being made all the time, and we use the vocabulary to realise which people are like us and which people are not like us. And we draw a circle around our friends with our jargon. And other people will exclude us with the way they use words, and as soon as we open our mouths, we present a shibboleth and we will be actually separated. That's the story of the Bible where King David uses the way that the Samaritans say the word shibboleth instead of shibboleth to separate the ones who were actually his enemies and ones who were actually part of his army. So you can do it with language, and we tend to do it all the time. And in dangerous situations, words are manipulated. Eugene said that was why the RAF pilots during the Second World War invented so many words. They invented their own jargon. They were on the edge of things. They needed to know who was with them and who was against them, who was on their side. Within the army, within the armed forces, they had to separate themselves out from other people. They created their own uniform within the uniform. The handlebar, moustache, all this bit was to literally create a very elite form inside themselves, knowing who they could actually rely on in such a situation. So this is what we do with language, and often you will use language to exclude people. I mentioned the fact that when I was doing a thesis at university, I was told it was too direct, and to make the language a bit more convoluted, make the sentences longer, so that it was harder to carry them along with you. Many people can't carry a clause while you're reading all the procedures and all the dangling meanings that come from it. So they like their sentences simple and straightforward. Particularly nowadays, if you read a newspaper, even like the Times, most of the sentences are very short. At one time it used to be quite a bit longer, and they used to use colons and semicolons. You very rarely see the news now, because most people aren't able to carry meaning through 2 or 3 lines of reading. So it's one of the things that we tend to do that to exclude people. We tend to make long sentences and long stories to separate those people who can follow with us and who are part of our meaningful group, and in the same way to separate that out. So in a sense, to cut through that, we're actually seeing here Owl is actually using that pontification. He's using his learning as a hammer to thump people with. He's not doing it because he wants to get meaning across. He's doing it because the correct opposite. He wants to rise above you because he knows how to spell Tuesday. An awful lot of what passes for poetry and literature is literally somebody making reference to things which we don't understand, so we think it's very clever. You know, when you realise that most of the stories in Greek mythology are easily learned, and the word tends to be the same ones used over again, a lot of classical philosophy, classical poetry and the novel form in the first part of the 20th century is easy to understand because they're making references to fairy stories which were written by the Greeks and which they all studied at grammar school. When you've understood that, you've understood that there isn't any great mystery to this. It's only mysterious if you start throwing in Oedipus and Achilles and all this sort of stuff, and you don't know what the story is. When you've read the story, the stuff becomes really quite simple and direct. Everything in the universe is simple and direct if you understand literally what are you coming at. If you obscure it from people, if you make it complicated and difficult, then it appears to be mysterious and complicated and difficult. But it should always be able to. I mean, Eugene's point about the letters were that they were actually engineering diagrams for the way energy is behaving in a particular place. So if you draw a letter A, and there's a reference to a letter A in a minute, it actually is a particular distinct engineering type description of what the energy is doing in that place, which are the same as the pictograms in Chinese as well. We're trying to describe something simply by drawing a picture of it. Okay? So, that's one of the answers I would bring to the fact of why would Eugene recommend a book like this, which is actually kicking the academics and the intellectuals and saying, you know, all this learning, because most people don't use learning to understand, they use learning to obfuscate the whole situation, and you use it as a barrier if you're not careful to keep people away from you. And if you actually explain the meaning of anything, then people can follow you. But you notice when you hear people actually, even in university, when you use a big word, you can see them all translated into the ordinary everyday Anglo-Saxon and then come back at you and understand it. So, you know, not many of us actually bounce Latin phrases around ourselves anymore, so we do have to retranslate it. And that is a very important part. So for us, remember, you can understand it. The other thing that Eugene used to say, which is the essence of this book as well, is you don't have intelligence, any of you. We are intelligent. We don't have to go and get it. We're stuffed with it. You only have to look and the thing unfolds to you and reveals itself. So just look. And that's what happens with Pooh. He just does. He can't hear the honey because everybody's talking. You know? He knows the way home, but while you keep asking him which way it is, he can't do it. One of the things that I mentioned about Darwin was when he was on the Beagle, he was fascinated by a Hawaiian chap who always could point to the direction of Hawaii. They picked up this native and they used him like a compass because they used to say, which way is Hawaii? And he'd say, it's over there. So he always knew where home was. Yeah? It's amazing. And there are animals who find their way home. Yeah. There's a book by Sheldrake about it, and they mention as a fact of a wonderful dog in Sheffield. That wherever you take it in Sheffield, it can find its way home. And they watched it by air.